OXFAM Transboundary Rivers of South Asia, TROSA, and Indian Environment Law Organisation. We are very pleased to have your participation in webinar 1 for this South Asia Transboundary Rivers regional webinar entitled Strengthening Preparedness and Resilience of South Asia's Transboundary Rivers. My name is Remy Kinner, working for the Water Convention Secretariat, and I will be your co-moderator today from a very overcast Geneva. The Water Convention is a unique international legal instrument and intergovernmental platform which aims to ensure the sustainable use of transboundary water resources by facilitating cooperation. Initially negotiated as a regional instrument, it has been opened up for accession to all UN member states around the world since 2016. Since then, several states have acceded and many other countries have started accession processes. States in Asia, including South Asia, regularly engage with the Water Convention's program of work areas, activities, and meetings. The Secretariat looks forward to strengthening engagement with South Asian states interested in the Convention as a global platform for transboundary water cooperation that can support localised efforts and also collaborating in such efforts with regional actors. For states without a national focal point for the Convention for all key communications, please feel free to contact me and I can explain the role and how to nominate. We also wish to thank the European Union for its support on the project promoting accession to the Water Convention. So for this webinar, which consists of 2 parts, it aims to 1, provide an opportunity for transboundary dialogue with and between states, regional actors and international partners on key current or emerging issues facing the region's transboundary rivers. 2, we seek to facilitate transboundary connections for improved coherence and coordination among the existing or emerging approaches and initiatives to address these current or emerging issues. 3, identify transboundary frameworks and networks that can strengthen long-term capacity building and avenues for engagement in decision-making processes on these issues and approaches. And also, the webinars are also intended to support Sustainable Development Goal 6 Global Acceleration Framework, which is facilitating implementation of SDG 6 to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all by 2030. Transboundary water cooperation contributes to regional peace, security, and sustainable development. Achieving SDG target 6.5 on integrated water resources management requires effective transboundary cooperation, since 60% of the world's freshwater flows in shared basins. A coherent and coordinated approach to shared water management is important for all SDGs, including health, food, energy, environment, peace, and many more. SDG target 6.5 has the aim, by 2030, implement integrated water resources management at all levels, including through transboundary cooperation as appropriate. And this is monitored through 2 indicators. SDG indicator 6.5.1 tracks the degree of implementation of integrated water resources management at all levels. SDG indicator 6.5.2 is specific to tracking transboundary water cooperation and is jointly monitored by UNECE and UNESCO. More details on indicator 6.5.2 for South Asia will be shared by my UNESCAP colleague during her keynote speech. I will now pass to my co-moderator, Arun.
Thank you, Remy. Welcome all. My name is Arun Shrestha, working for ICIMOD and speaking from Kathmandu right now. And I will be your co-moderator today. As we know, South Asia's transboundary river face complex multi-dimensional challenges. From Earth's 3rd pole down to some of the largest and most populous delta in the world, the region is increasingly facing a multitude of pressing issues with cross-border impacts. And COVID-19 has exacerbated existing pressures in South Asia, and progress towards SDG 6 was already substantially delayed. Climate change and water stress are now compounding prevailing challenges, as we know. Furthermore, mainstreaming civil society engagement processes into decision-making on water management has proven challenging in the South Asia region. So in today's webinar, we intend to discuss some of those issues. But before going into that, I would like to remind us on some of the guidelines, rules for today's webinar. So the requests to all of you are, please note your comments or your questions in the chat box, and we'll note these for the moderators to seek to call on panelists to respond to as many as possible. Secondly, please ensure that you are respectful of everyone's perspective and seek to engage constructively. We ask that you ensure you have a headset you can use and stay in a quiet place and keep your intervention short, not more than 2 or 3 minutes maximum, so that we can have as much interactive dialogue as possible. And then I just wanted also to inform that this webinar will be recorded, and a link posted on the web pages will be posted on web pages of partners along with presenters PowerPoint. And before handing over back to Remy, I just wanted to mention here that we must importantly note that we had sought to achieve gender equality among the formal presenters in the agenda. But there were multiple female speakers we had approached for formal speaking roles, but were not, unfortunately, available to participate. But this is something which we'll strive to achieve in the future. And we'll also, in this webinar, seek to give ample space to women, particularly South Asian women's voices in the Q&A session. With that, I would like to hand it over back to my co-moderator, Remy.
Great, thank you, Arun. So just briefly, the agenda for today's webinar, for those who haven't seen the agenda, is as follows. So we'll have 2 opening keynote speakers. Then we'll go into session 1, which will feature panel speakers on the topic of Water Food-Energy-Ecosystem Nexus approach, upstream and downstream benefits. And then we'll have 40 minutes after that for Q&A with those panelists. We'll then take a brief 15-minute pause between the sessions to refresh and reset. Then we'll come back for session 2, which will feature panel speakers on the topic of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, looking at floods and droughts. And again, we'll have about 40 minutes for Q&A. And that's the agenda for today. So with that, I would like to turn to our keynote speakers. So our first keynote speaker is Ms. Mia Seppo, who is the UN Resident Coordinator in Bangladesh. And I'll just read from her bio. Mia Seppo joined the United Nations country team in Bangladesh as the United Nations Resident Coordinator in October 2017. With broad expertise and experience, including in post-conflict and peacekeeping contexts, with managing support for complex elections and in humanitarian crises and responses, Mia has served the majority of her career in senior managerial roles within the UN, working in Tajikistan, Sierra Leone, and Malawi, as well as in UN headquarters in New York, with the UNDP regional bureaus for Africa and for Europe and CIS. Mia launched her UN career in 1996 with a focus on governance and human rights issues. Prior to joining the UN, Mia worked for civil society and think tanks, including the Finnish Committee for European Security. Mia is a Finnish national and holds a master's degree in social sciences from the University of Helsinki in Finland. And the title of her presentation today is Water Security in Bangladesh, Challenges and Opportunities. And with that, I welcome Mia to make your keynote presentation.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon and good morning to participants joining from Geneva. I understand distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and pleasure to join this critical discussion on one of the key issues of the future of humanity, water. And as you could hear from the very generous introduction, I am not a water expert. I'm delighted, though, to serve in a country where water is a very key consideration in all the development work that we do. And I'm very grateful to my colleagues from across UN agencies who work on these issues and have contributed to put together some of the thoughts that I will share with you this afternoon. Ensuring the availability of water for populations around the world is one of the major challenges of our time. Without water, our societies cannot survive, and yet water is a finite resource that every country depends on. A significant proportion of the global population reside close to shared river basins, as was said in the opening remarks already, and the water practices and management of these rivers directly impact the livelihoods of communities close to the rivers and beyond. With water scarcity an increasing issue across South Asia, it is crucial that we work together to protect and preserve water resources needed for sustainable growth and development. This underscores not only the critical need of an integrated approach across the UN system, but also increased cooperation and collaboration, action on water management at the regional and international level. And I want to acknowledge the role of UNESCAP and the good collaboration that the UN country team in Bangladesh enjoys with UNESCAP, and of course the role of civil society. Bangladesh, as you probably all know, is called the land of rivers. With 57 transboundary rivers going through Bangladesh, it truly deserves this name. As some of you may know, in June 2019, the Bangladesh High Court granted its rivers the status and right of a living entity, becoming the 4th country in the world to do so, and the first to extend the declaration to every river within its territory. As Bangladesh is the lowest riparian state within the basin, it is both heavily dependent on and susceptible to runoff from neighboring countries, which can contribute to flooding during the monsoon season, drought during the dry season, as well as riverbank erosion and pollution. The practices of neighboring countries in terms of water management, therefore, impact greatly on Bangladesh, and this is further exacerbated by the heightened vulnerabilities to climate change. The impact of climate change on natural water resources in particular is a grave concern for Bangladesh. You will all have heard about how the rising sea levels are placing Bangladesh's already vulnerable coastal populations at further risk of inundation, while the adverse impact of salt water intrusion on natural water resources leads to scarcity, which is being felt across the country. Anticipated increases in river salinity levels in Bangladesh southwest, for example, are expected to reduce the availability of potable water, which is already a serious issue for more than 20 million people on the country's coast. So this impacts on livelihoods from agriculture to fisheries, to forestry, to food security, nutrition security, and it will have an increase in impact as climate change impact increases. With over 70% of the country's land used to farm crops that provide the primary source of food for the majority of the population, food security is expected to be increasingly compromised as the impact of climate change destroy arable farming land and water needed to fuel irrigation processes. At the same time, Bangladesh continues to experience the devastation brought by extreme weather-related events, which are increasing in severity as a result of climate change. This year, we have seen heavy monsoon rain and water from upstream sources causing slow onset severe flooding in low-lying areas of northern Bangladesh, directly affecting over 5.4 million people and causing 1 million households to become waterlogged. It is beyond any doubt that Bangladesh is truly at the forefront of the climate emergency. Extreme weather-related events, including increased inland and coastal flooding, cyclones, and storm surges, will continue to place strain on the water resources of Bangladeshi communities in both rural and urban areas alike by contaminating critical groundwater, which not only amplifies immediate humanitarian needs, but can have devastating impact on public health, food security, and the livelihoods of millions. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to highlight some of the work that the United Nations is doing together with the government of Bangladesh and civil society to reduce the impact of river-related flooding and working to help strengthen community resilience in these highly climate-impacted areas. The government has developed the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100, a multi-sectoral strategy to secure the country's water resources and mitigate the cross-cutting impacts of climate change by strengthening flood management capacity, improving agricultural sustainability, strengthening infrastructure in coastal zones, and strengthening governance and transboundary cooperation across and around areas of water and water management. To support the government's preparedness and response, the Humanitarian Country Task Team, which is co-led by the UN with the Ministry of Disaster Management and Response, is looking at national technical responses to both prepare and respond. The HCTT has a working group on anticipatory action to develop a model for forecast-based financing. And this is very innovative in terms of humanitarian responses. In this approach, WFP identifies households at risk of flooding should the floods associated with the annual monsoon rains in the Himalayas and Ganges-Brahmaputra-Magna River plains raise water levels above normal. A trigger level is then identified above which flood levels automatically activate release of funds to those pre-identified vulnerable households. Mathematical modeling of flood levels can help predict when this trigger level will be exceeded so that money can be sent into the mobile cash accounts of these pre-identified households. The first successful pilot on forecast-based financing took place last year, and this year we are further expanding the pilot. This year, several UN agencies are involved. This includes FAO when it comes to timely agricultural input, providing animal fodder. And this includes UNFPA through hygiene items targeting women and girls. This innovation in terms of humanitarian response and forecast-based financing is now included in the government's standing order for disasters. And this will become one of the tools which Bangladesh continues to respond to climate disaster, has a very strong track record on. Now, moving from responding to floods, transboundary water management policies and strategies also have significant impact on the lives and livelihoods of Bangladesh agriculturalists. Reduced water flow in international waterways disrupts downstream sedimentation patterns and increases soil and water salinity, affecting the productivity and the production of crops. In the north, farmers suffer from variable water flows, which leaves them fighting extreme flooding and loss of agricultural land due to erosion. FAO is promoting climate-smart agriculture practices, helping farmers to adapt to changing conditions with new technologies and crop varieties. Recognizing that the impact of floods is different depending on the livelihoods of the people affected, WFP has also started a pilot crop insurance scheme for farmers and a flood insurance scheme for farmhands whose livelihoods have been compromised by flooding. This approach brings the private sector into flood response, an approach which is hoped to be more cost-effective than using public funds alone. On climate change adaptation, an area where Bangladesh is providing innovation and lessons learned to the rest of the world, UNDP, as well as other agencies, are continuing to work on building the capacity of vulnerable communities, local government institutions, and CSOs for planning and financing climate change adaptation solutions in select climate vulnerable areas. UNDP has worked with partners to strengthen the capacity of vulnerable groups and local stakeholders for accountable planning and financing of climate change adaptation and disaster risk actions to build resilience. It has enhanced the access of local government initiatives and agencies are working closely with the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs to address the impact of soil salinity on coastal communities in Bangladesh coastal districts of Khulna and Satkhira, both of which frequently experience cyclones and tidal flooding, as well as severe water scarcity due to high salt water intrusion. Now, as was referred to earlier, the sector of water and sanitation has further increased in urgency during these COVID times. Several UN agencies, including UNICEF, WFP, UNFPA, are contributing to working with the government to address the WASH sector, which faces persistent challenges in delivering universal and safely managed water access, and is further challenged by recurring extreme weather events, culminating potable groundwater and water scarcity in hard-to-reach areas such as remote islands. I will skip the references to SDG 6, since this was referred to by the previous speaker. This is obviously what brings the UN together with the government. That's the sustainable development agenda that we are working on. It's important to note that full achievement of SDG 6 requires not only integrated action at the local and national level, but more effective transboundary water governance. At the same time, transboundary water governance will be critical for the full achievement of related SDGs, notably 2, to end hunger, 3, good health, 7, affordable and clean energy, and 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions for all countries. As noted, within SDG 6, more integrated water resource management across all levels, local, national, and international, will be vital for countries to secure the water resources they need to make progress on other key goals within the 2030 agenda. Lack of integration of major water users in planning and implementation, communication gaps between policymakers and stakeholders, lack of political will to create an environment conducive for effective water governance, and the marginalization and exclusion of citizens to participate in water projects remains a key challenge in many countries. However, let's build on the opportunities that are there. There's great lessons to learn in terms of increased Nexus programming, linking the humanitarian and development programming, linking the preparedness, response, and recovery planning. There's great lessons to learn from Bangladesh coastal communities as well as other areas in terms of adaptation to the impact of climate change. As the impact of climate change make water stress more acute across South Asia, how water is shared and managed will be critically important for all member states. South Asia's particular vulnerability to climate change highlights the urgent need for greater regional cooperation on water management, which will be a crucial factor if not only protecting lives and livelihoods, but in ensuring sustainable economic growth and development for countries across the region. Ladies and gentlemen, participants, There is a global momentum in building support for transboundary water cooperation, which is so critical for our future. And here, of course, the Water Convention that this discussion will focus on is of a very central importance and consideration. I hope today's webinar will also serve and will promote a promising development as we learn more from one another and we begin some much needed and timely discussions on the challenges and opportunities in strengthening preparedness and resilience of South Asia's transboundary rivers. I thank you very much for listening to these thoughts from the UN in the country of rivers, Bangladesh. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Mia. Thank you so much for your opening keynote remark. I think in particular, you've really well captured the challenges that are facing Bangladesh in the context of water, but also transboundary water, but also the actions that are being taken by the UN in collaboration with government and the private sector and other actors. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it. So moving on to our next speaker. We have our next keynote speaker is Ms. Solène Ledoz, who is Environmental Affairs Officer with UNESCAP. So just a brief note on her bio. Holding a degree in agronomy and an MSc in Environment and Natural Resources Economics, Solène has 17 years of experience in managing programs and supporting policy processes promoting sustainable natural resources management. She worked in the field in ecology in Zimbabwe and in sustainable development in Guadeloupe, in sustainable rural development, managed scientific bilateral cooperation portfolio of the French Embassy in Indonesia, and then supported national United Kingdom policies on recycling and sustainable procurement of natural resources. Since 2009, she has joined the United Nations, first as the interim secretariat of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services at UNEP, with a focus on communication and stakeholder engagement there. In 2014, she joined UNDP as the Global Biodiversity and Ecosystems Services Coordinator, where she developed and managed a capacity building network of 85 international key organizations involved in biodiversity and ecosystem services. She joined ESCAP in September 2017 as an Environmental Affairs Officer, where she manages a portfolio on natural resources management and sustainable development across Asia and the Pacific. Solène has a passion for bridging the gaps between science, policy, and practice for better management of the environment. And the title of her presentation today is Setting the Scene: Importance of Regional Cooperation in Climate Action, Environment, Resilience, and Nexus Initiatives for South Asian Transboundary Rivers. And with that, I welcome Solène, and I ask also, please, if we can also ensure that we keep to time, that would be much appreciated. So welcome, Solène. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Remy, and well done on your French accent. It's difficult to pronounce my name. I'm very happy to be here today. I see great attendance, and it's my honor to represent ESCAP today. So I'm just going to share my screen because I've got a short presentation for you. Okay, so I think, can you see my screen properly?
Yes, we can see. It's great.
Thank you.
Yes, we can.
All right, so I'm going to go through it. And as you said, Remy, I've been asked to present on setting the scene and talking about the importance of regional cooperation in climate action, environment, resilience, and nexus initiatives for South Asian transboundary rivers. So that's quite a big topic, but I'll try to cover it in 10 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a bit of an issue with the way the presentation shows here. I don't know what the issue is. Let me try to go back. Can you maybe try to take over and show it from your screen? I don't know really what the issue is here. Or I can.
We can try and load that, Solène, while you present. So I would ask Nee, our support officer, to upload from her screen, and maybe you can keep presenting.
Thank you. I apologize. It's not usually an issue I've dealt with before. Anyway, so what I would like to present is first like why ESCAP is here today and what we're doing in terms of our work on water. I'm just going to go back to my initial presentation. I don't actually really need it. It's okay. I'll just talk to it. So we're really here to promote a regional collaboration on various issues in the environment throughout Asia and the Pacific. We also are the focal point for facilitating the UN Water Regional Coordination Group on SDG 6. And we contribute to, in that sense, to global processes. We lead the regional follow-up and review of all the SDGs, and that also includes SDG 6. And in that regard, we've also recently collaborated with ECE and the Water Convention on a workshop for the follow-up and review of SDG 6.5.2 on transboundary basin areas. We also provide support for stakeholder engagement in water issues. Thank you, Mia, for referring to our collaboration with Bangladesh on a project on industrial water pollution. This is the kind of support we can provide to countries across the region. And we also are quite strongly interested in promoting integrated environmental approaches, so nexus approaches, including for water in policy making. So in terms of where we stand on SDG indicator 6.5.2 in particular, noting, as we said earlier, that UNECE and UNESCO are the custodian agencies, so the agencies in charge of monitoring progress against that indicator that measures transboundary water cooperation. There have been, we're currently at the second cycle for reporting. The first one was held in 2017. And we're doing a little bit better in cycle 2, but really we have to state that this indicator in particular is the lowest in terms of reporting percentage across Asia and the Pacific, in that we really need to make a big effort to contribute more to report, because ultimately, if we report appropriately, we can support more sustainable transboundary water cooperation and decision making on sustainable and inclusive growth, water conflict management, climate change, adaptation, etc.
So then could I just briefly interrupt to say, could you either expand your screen so that we can see as you click through, or if you could unshare your screen so that our tech support can upload the presentation. Thank you.
Is that okay now?
Yes, that's quite large, unless you want our tech support to share the screen on behalf of you. If you can relinquish control.
Oh no, I think that looks okay now, doesn't it? Okay,
yes,
great.
It does.
Okay, thank you, Remy. Okay, so as we mentioned also earlier during this webinar today, in South Asia in particular, but just like going back to the SDG 6 follow-up and review in Asia and the Pacific, as you can see on the right side of the screen, we've collaborated with many UN agencies and UN Water to kind of look at the state of SDG 6 in Asia and the Pacific. And with a focus now on South Asia in particular, we can see that it's a sub-region that's extremely high in terms of water stress, that experience water scarcity, especially for drinking and agricultural purposes, where the access to water is uneven. So this has also very high social consequences. We can also observe an overexploitation and fast depletion of groundwater, issues of pollution and contamination of surface water resources, also high incidence of waterborne diseases and death. And as mentioned before, also the impacts of climate change really kind of heightened these risks. And overall, I think it's not a small thing to say that the frequent floods and droughts in the sub-region could cost as much as 215 billion each year in terms of dollars by 2030. So this is also a very big issue for the sub-region. So why is it important to focus on transboundary water cooperation? Well, first of all, 60% of global fresh water is in shared basins, and it needs to be managed collaboratively. In a region also that has the lowest per capita water availability per person, issues of water stress and pollution, integrated water resource management is exceedingly vital, especially when we are dealing with very strong pressure from climate change, increasing populations and economic growth, as well as competing uses for water. In terms of looking at depleted transboundary water supplies, then it's really two-way here. It can both create social unrest and spark conflict, but also between countries, I mean, but it can also be a catalyst for cooperation amongst nations for peace and sustainable development. Integrated SDG 6 planning and implementation, as Mia was saying earlier, is really essential at the local, national, and transboundary levels to address upstream and downstream dynamics in particular. So this is just to show you, I'm not going into the detail of that, but like we've made an exercise of mapping all the links between SDG 6 and all the other SDGs at the target level. And you can see the intricacies of that graph. Basically, it shows that water is everywhere and very critical and central to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Agenda. So we can see on the graph here that, of course, like water is linked with energy security, food security, and also everything that has to do with people in general. It sustains economic development. And so the achievement of some of the SDGs depend highly on the achievement of the other in that kind of nexus approach. Water, disaster risk reduction, resilience, poverty, agriculture and food security, ocean, fisheries, energy are very closely linked with water, and also with social issues, including gender equity and economic issues such as finance. And of course, like all the issues around integrated policy issues and everything that has to deal with the mean of implementations of the SDG. So really, there's a very strong need to arbitrate the synergies and trade-offs in a nexus between the different water uses. When we make decisions on water, this is very important, especially if we share these resources and aquifer basins. So urgent action and cooperation is really needed at the transboundary scale. We need to quickly adopt adequate and adaptive integrated water resource management approaches that will be supported by strong political commitment for transboundary cooperation at the national level, with appropriate governance, effective financing, and effective monitoring. This, if we do this, will enhance action for SDG 6 and related SDGs on international trade, climate change adaptation, resilience, economic growth, and food security. Here, hydrodiplomacy, which is cooperation over water at the diplomatic level, can really prevail, we hope, over conflict over water. An example from your region is the Indus Water Treaty from 1960 between India and Pakistan that really has survived disputes between the two countries. And it provided a framework for resolving disagreements over water use. So, and water can really be an entry point for larger diplomacy between countries instead of being a focal point of tension. Transboundary water agreements and institutions can help facilitate cooperation and support larger diplomacy and peace building efforts at different scales. So now, why do we need multilateral and global framework instruments? Well, they're really useful in situations where there's no specific legal and institutional arrangement at the basin level, where legal and institutional arrangements exist, but they are weak, and we're also in situations where not all states are parties to the basin agreements, which is the case in 80% of the basin. So of course, like these instruments support and don't replace what already exists, but they have the advantage of providing common language and a shared understanding. They promote coordination, they strengthen implementation, the profile of transboundary waters at the global level, and also can really help facilitate negotiations. So here again, I want to stress the very critical and central role of the Water Convention. So as you know, it's a legal and institutional framework for transboundary water cooperation that contributes to sustainable development, international peace, and security. It provides a unique platform to discuss progress of transboundary water cooperation worldwide under the umbrella of the UN. And it's open to all interested countries. We have more than 100 countries exchanging experiences and knowledge to progress in cooperation. As the UN Secretary General said in October 2018, the global opening of the Water Convention, the accession of the first countries from outside the UNECE region, and the momentum in support of the convention are promising developments. Along with the Water Courses Convention, the world has the ability to strengthen the rule of law in transboundary cooperation worldwide. then he calls on member states to join both conventions, the water conventions, and to strive for their full implementation. That's a really strong call, and I really urge you today to make the most of the water convention. And just very quickly to finish on what could ESCAP's role be in terms of supporting effective transboundary collaboration on water and in the adoption of these nexus approaches. I invite you to join the UN Water Expert Group on regional level coordination that has really quite a number of organizations, including from civil society, and to discuss regional issues on water and to make progress on the SDG 6 in the region. We also have regular platforms for sharing regional lessons and best practices, including on water, and recently on water pollution by industries. And we also provide a range of learning possibilities through what we call the SDG helpdesk, and I give you the link here. And then any country in Asia and the Pacific is also free to make specific requests to ESCAP for support, as Bangladesh did 2 years ago. So with this, I really want to thank you for having me, and if there's any question or follow-up, please feel free to contact me anytime. I'll be very pleased to answer. Thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you very much, Selene, for your keynote address as well. Thank you also for giving us the kind of broader overarching perspective of Asia and particularly South Asia, and looking at some of those key issues, the role of SDG implementation and reporting under SDG 6.5.2 in the region, also looking at some of these legal frameworks and platforms that can contribute to transboundary cooperation, such as the Water Convention, and then also looking at ESCAP's contribution in the region to those efforts. So thank you to our keynote speakers. And now this moves us into our first topic session. So the first topic session is balancing water, food, energy, ecosystem nexus benefits in transboundary rivers with a focus on ecosystems. I am your moderator for this first session. And I'd like to firstly invite our first speaker, Arun Shrestha. Now, I'll give you his brief bio. So Dr. Arun Bhakta Shrestha is a senior climate change specialist and program manager for River Basins and Cryosphere Regional Program of ICIMOD, based in Kathmandu. He has a PhD in Earth Sciences from the University of New Hampshire in the USA, and a master's degree in hydraulic engineering from Minsk in the former USSR. His main areas of expertise include regional cooperation, climate change, integrated water resources management, glaciers and glacial hazards, glacial lake risk mitigation, atmospheric environment and hydrological modelling. Dr. Shrestha is on the editorial panel for Advances in Climate Change Research, Elsevier, review editor in Cryosphere Sciences, Frontiers in Earth Sciences, and Journal of Hydrology Meteorology, which is the Society of Hydrologists and Meteorologists in Nepal. He is one of the editors of the Hindu Kush Himalaya Assessment and one of the coordinating lead authors of the chapter on climate change in the assessment. The title of his presentation is River Basin and Transboundary Landscape Approaches. Could water, energy, food, ecosystem nexus bring synergy to those approaches in South Asia? And with that, it's my great pleasure to invite Arun to make his presentation on the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Remy, for that introduction. And it's a great pleasure to present on this topic. Well, I have, South Asia here, but I would be talking a little bit more focused around Hindu Kush Himalaya, the mountainous region of South and Central Asia. And to give a bit of introduction to the space we are talking about, the dark area is the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. And this Hindu Kush Himalaya region, the large mountainous area, also known as the third pole, is kind of a source to 10 major river basins shown here. And these river basins and the Hindu Kush Himalaya is shared by 8 countries. 240 million people live within the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. But then if we consider the basin area, it is 1.9 billion people living in those 10 river basins. So you can see the upstream downstream linkage is quite strong. And to show the upstream downstream linkage, this graphic I have tried to put here shows a typical kind of river basins, and in Hindu Kush Himalaya, it starts from the upstream part, and then it has midstream part and downstream part, right? The plains. And each of those sub sections have their own kind of characteristics, benefits or opportunities, but also there are many kinds of challenges they are facing, right? But then, what is very important is that there are many kinds of boundaries intersecting this continuity of upstream and downstream. So any kind of benefit sharing, we have to cross those boundaries, which are sometimes also barriers. I think that's very important. I think I would like to mention it here. And what is also important is that the number of people living in those river basins is quite dramatic, particularly in the downstream region. The upstream high mountain regions are quite less or sparse in some areas, but the downstream areas are among the most populated region in the world. And therefore, when we talk about the environmental services coming from the river basin, I think the upstream, downstream, dimensions become very important. And what is important is that not only the present day population, but also future forecast in the population is very important. And some of those say that, about 65% in the urban areas and quite dramatic growth by middle of the century, which is likely to bring quite a dramatic change in the water demand. So this upstream downstream linkage has to be looked at very seriously. Now, talking about the transboundary dimension, I thought of giving a glimpse of opportunities and challenges and current status of transboundary cooperation in this region. So there are ample opportunities for cooperation, I think. Of course, water is the central entity, which is very important for anything, for life, drinking, irrigation. But I think beyond water, there are many different benefits that can be accrued from those river basins. For example, energy as hydropower, immense hydropower potential is there, which has not been utilized, but also the source of energy, hydropower, and demand for energy are in different places, which also provides opportunity for cooperation. And of course, navigation, that is one area where the benefit can actually flow from downstream to upstream. And I think that could, if used in combination with other kinds of benefit, that would be really interesting. But there are challenge areas which also kind of could be used as opportunity for transboundary cooperation, like floods, erosions, and sedimentation. And in the next session, we'll be talking about that. These are the context, but I think looking at the cooperation status, I think this region, as we all know, is known for very little cooperation around water issues. And whatever there are, these are mostly of bilateral nature and not regional. And we know the benefit of regional cooperation as opposed to benefits of bilateral cooperation. These are often sectoral, cooperation and not integrated, and mostly resolves around resources as opposed to benefits. So this is the context, and we at ICIMOD are, working on this, mostly taking it from science-based cooperation, because, we believe that, having developed certain understanding around issue challenges, it is very important also in a long-term process for trust building. Just an example, the Hindu Kush Himalayan assessment that we produced last year was, combination of many, scientists, contribution, bringing up with a state of art in assessment, scientific assessment, but not limiting to that, going ahead and developing call to actions, action that can actually put those into operation. And the recently we had this ministerial summit where the call to actions were actually endorsed by the 8 member countries through a ministerial declaration. So these are some of the areas where we are working on, but definitely quite a lot needs to be done. But then, why do we need cooperation? I think this is something which we could have skipped, but I think I would just mention a few points to highlight, because we know this region has varied distribution of water. Distribution with time and space is quite varied. So to take, advantage of that, or reduce the challenges posed by those varied distribution, I think cooperation is important. Reduce risks of climate-related effects, making water supply erratic. I think that's also a very important issue. But what is very important is the cooperation, regional or transboundary cooperation, can provide opportunity for overcoming economic, environmental, technological, and institutional barriers, which might not be possible if it is bilateral or only by single countries. And if it is regional, this can also mean multiple benefits of infrastructure can be developed, because if only one country develops, then it would be for one purpose, which will not give adequate benefit from those infrastructural benefits. So that is very important, and which is very obvious also. But then when we talk about transboundary cooperation, of course, river basin is a natural kind of geographic framework. But then there is another intersecting geography, which we also call transboundary landscape. And we at ICIMOD work in both river basins, but also very strongly in those transboundary landscape like Karakoram, Pamir, Wakhan, Kailas, Everest, Kanchenjunga, Far Eastern Himalaya, Cherrapunji, and Chittagong. So as you can see, they overlap in space very much. And actually, if you look at them in actual ground, you cannot actually distinguish them, right? But each of those, depending on whom you are talked to, river basin talk about their own kind of set of activities, framework, etc. So what I have tried to put here is try to compare those two approaches. For example, in river basin, we work in geographic frameworks like basin, subbasin, watershed. Major ecosystem services are water, sediment, ecosystem, tourism, and culture. The approaches we talk about river basin people are IWRM, IRBM, and in Nexus, it is about energy, water, energy, and food. The challenges are climate change, cryosphere change, water scarcity, water demand, natural hazards, etc. And the transboundary aspects are related to upstream, downstream risk and benefit sharing, water sharing, energy, food, and navigation. Now, if you talk about the landscape approach, the transboundary landscape, the geographic framework is landscape, of course. Major ecosystem services are biodiversity, forest, rangeland, wildlife, tourism, culture, and also quite commonly, this group talks about provisioning, regulating, and supporting ecosystem services. And of course, the approach is landscape approach. And challenges are climate change, cryosphere change, water scarcity, etc., and transboundary aspects between different groups, right? Now, if we are trying to combine these two, then this is the question, I think. It is not something I would like to say it has been thought through, but I would like to put to the group is that can we think of combining at least some aspects of those approaches and talk about riverscape approach, right? Riverscape approach, and just going slightly into it, riverscape approach, as described earlier in the keynote, it was about water, energy, food. All it does, it adds ecosystem more prominently, not as a cross-cutting underlying thing, but also as a prominent thing, which very much is important because natural resources and ecosystem services underlie water, food, and energy security, right? So I think
1 minute remaining.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Getting there. Because I think that is because this ecosystem is very important, and it is also not only should be taken as underlying kind of entity, but it has a very strong linkage between water, energy, food, and ecosystem. And therefore, in this water, energy, food ecosystem framework, which we think could be the riverscape approach actually, The underlying principles are, interdependence of resources, interdependence of dependence of sectors, integrated policy solutions, and valued natural capital. These are not something very new from the regular water energy food nexus, but I think it emphasizes on this. But then also is the water energy food and ecosystem nexus also has potential for transboundary cooperation. And we think it could be because it talks about new resources and approaches for transboundary cooperation. It alters the actor dynamics and also tries to engage key actors, more and more actors actually. It resets transboundary cooperation thinkings and provides border aspects of water energy food ecosystem security. So potentially it could be also a vehicle for transboundary cooperation. But then finally, I think these are all things which are still evolving, right? I think there have been a lot of work on it. UNECE, water conventions, etc., have been working on it. But for Hindu Kush Himalaya, this probably is a bit new topic. So what we are thinking of doing is working further on it, and I am encouraging all of you to come forward in the discussion about water energy food nexus in the context of Hindu Kush Himalaya. Could it be a mechanism for transboundary cooperation in this region? Could we think of piloting this approach in a smaller scale in the future? I think these are some areas where it needs more brainstorming. This is just an initiation, and I just wanted to throw this idea. And with this, I invite all of you to come forward for the discussion in the future. Thank you, Remy. Back to you.
Many thanks, Arun. Thank you for setting the scene and with this great opening presentation. I think that really gets our minds ticking over about the possibilities and opportunities and also what to take into consideration. So with that, I'll throw to our next speaker, who is Jyotiraj Patra from OXFAM Transboundary Rivers of South Asia. Just for Raj's bio, Raj Patra works with OXFAM as the project manager for OXFAM Transboundary Rivers of South Asia, TROSA. Prior to joining OXFAM, he was the Regional Evidence Advisor, South Asia for the UK government, supported Ecosystem Services for Poverty Alleviation Global Research Program. He is a Leadership in Environment and Development Fellow and accredited partnership broker. He has an interdisciplinary background in environmental science, policy, business, and human rights. And the title of his presentation is Facilitating Inclusive Transboundary Dialogues and Action, the TROSA Insights. Raj, it's my pleasure to invite you to speak.
Thanks, Remy. Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, friends. In my presentation, I will share some of the learnings and insights from the Transboundary Rivers of South Asia, TROSA project. And as part of this, I will be focusing more on inclusion and highlight why this is such a critical issue when we were talking about preparedness and resilience building and some of our lessons learned from the TROSA project. Very briefly, this will be the outline of my presentation, where I will be focusing on the 3 key insights from the project, which we thought is quite relevant for today's discussion. It's mostly the trust, translation, and transformation elements, 3 T's, if you like. And as a way forward, I will also share some of the opportunities at the national, subnational, and regional levels, and then I initiate the discussion for us to work together and see what are some of the opportunities for us to move forward. Very briefly on the inclusion part of it, I think given shared water dialogues and decision-making processes are highly political and often contested in nature, it is critical to have these spaces and support systems for more inclusive processes which will enable meaningful engagement, participation, and contribution of the marginalized communities and voices. It's key to it is addressing some of the existing inequalities and differential power relations, including the power corridors that often exist among stakeholders, and that perpetuates marginalization and discrimination, including gender-based discrimination when we talk about regional water cooperation and resilience building initiatives. And this is also critical from the sustainability perspective. As one of the keynote speakers, he was highlighting the progress of SDG 6 in the Asia Pacific region. One of the key indicators is that of 6.B, which is on communities' participation as a means of implementing SDG 6. So that is where we think initiatives and programs like TROSA, which focuses a lot on community-based initiatives, bottom-up dialogue processes, have a lot of scopes to contribute. Very briefly, I will just touch on the Transboundary Rivers of South Asia TROSA project design. If you see, it's a regional water governance project working on some of the basins in the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna, and Salween basin. It's a multi-partner initiative working with a diverse set of stakeholders. And at the heart of the program's design lies human rights. So it's a human rights-based approach which drives all our initiatives. And the overall framework also has 3 R's. It's the riverine resources that we are talking about, and particularly focusing on rights of the communities, particularly women, girls, and the indigenous communities. And the overall idea, which is very much aligned to today's discussion, is the resilience in these transboundary basins. The 3 insights from the program I'll focus for today's discussion. The first one is trust. Trust definitely for inclusive dialogues, building and maintaining trust among various stakeholders is critical. Quite often, trust deficit among riparian states is highlighted as a major roadblock for transboundary water dialogue. But TROSA experience demonstrates also the need to understand and address trust within and among the civil society groups, including border communities living in some of these transboundary basins. Civil society organizations and communities are not homogeneous entities, and they have differential capacities, access to power and resources, and differential aspirations. Dialogue processes which miss on these underlying differences or overlook them often end up being one-off events or mere consultations. Over the last 4 years of implementation, TROSA and partners have been convening and facilitating dialogues among civil society organizations at the community, subnational, national, and regional levels. And as part of this, we have come to realize the need for, as well as opportunities on to convene the conversation and dialogue through formal and informal channels. And some of these are most effective when the focus is more on water-related benefits and risk rather than just water sharing, which is often a zero-sum endeavor. And Arun, my previous speaker, was also alluding to the need for and the opportunities around the Nexus approach. Let me briefly share some of the examples from the TROSA project with regard to how the project has been facilitating trust among, particularly among the riverine communities. One approach has been that of citizen science initiative to generate more data on water quality, which is again something less talked about in regional water cooperation discussions. It is mostly the water quantity and who gets what. So the water quality initiatives in the Mahakali Basin, which is between India and Nepal, using citizen science approaches, and most of it is led by the women groups in the communities. And the another example is from Bangladesh, where OXFAM and partners have in Bangladesh have initiated a very innovative bottom-up dialogue process. It's called Nodi Boitok. It translates into river meetings in the Brahmaputra Basin. And through these processes, the communities and civil society groups talk on various issues and highlight some of their challenges, which are subsequently collated and presented and used in the advocacy and influencing work at the local level. Similar work around trust building has also, among civil society organizations, has also been facilitated by our regional partner, IUCN, as part of the Bridge GPM CSOs network, and also by CURTS International on India-Bangladesh inland water issues, which have been trying to translate some of the key policy issues and frameworks and simplify the content and process for better engagement of CSOs, small and marginal traders, and government agencies, particularly those at the national and subnational levels. So moving on to the next sort of insight on translation. And I think This is something where I would like to emphasize a bit on the need for working with diverse stakeholders, particularly with the civil society groups, indigenous communities, and subnational government. As our experience shows, existing knowledge and information gaps are related to transboundary water issues, and most importantly, including diverse interpretation of various laws, treaties, policies at different levels and by different stakeholders. For example, TROSA partners have been making concerted efforts to translate various opportunities which are beyond water sharing, such as sharing of benefits through collaborative efforts on ecosystem restoration, nature-based solution, which something IUCN is facilitating among the civil society groups, maintenance of water diversion channels, some initiatives between India and Bhutan in the Saral-Bhanga Basin, fisheries and inland water trade in the India-Bangladesh transboundary system, responsible extraction of sand, flood early warning and preparedness in the Mahakali Basin between India and Nepal, and use these as entry points for dialogues and collaboration among various stakeholders. One particular example which I think I'd like to highlight here is the collaboration between OXFAM and partners in Nepal, particularly the Bhimdatta municipality, along the Transboundary Mahakali for responsible sand mining guideline. This is an example which clearly shows how the critical policy issues around sand mining, which is often a very political and sensitive topic. In many instances, partners work together to translate some of the policy needs and identify the opportunities through which they can work with the municipal authority at the local level to identify areas which could basically help in building some of the responsible sand mining guidelines, including some initiatives around no mining zone, and through that work with the local private sector, particularly the mining authorities and some of the small and medium enterprises engaged in the sand mining value chain. The third one is around transformation, and I think this is again something which we think is critical in terms of looking at initiatives around resilience and water cooperation. For inclusive transboundary dialogues, there is a need to move away from business as usual processes of consultations and dialogues to processes and practices which are centered around the human rights-based approach. And this is something which TROSA and partners have been doing. And this is important because such rights-based approach adopted in transboundary water and water-related dialogues could further open up inclusive spaces of dialogues and cooperation on trade, climate, resilience, and sustainable development. One particular example I would like to highlight is with regard to working with the youth. Recently, in partnership with South Asian University and the UNESCO Chair in International Water Cooperation, we convened the first TROSA online winter school where we had 17 women candidates out of the total 21 from India, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And one of the key themes and a sort of a demand that emerged was to provide more safe spaces and opportunities for young people as active citizens to engage in and lead some of these processes, and not just invited to few workshops and one-off meetings.
We're over time, so if you could please quickly summarize.
Yes, I'm just wrapping up. Thanks, Remy. So here in this slide, I have highlighted some of the key opportunities that the project and the partners are looking at, and some of this has already been mentioned. For example, the HKH call to action, Arun mentioned about it. And one of the key themes from the TROSA perspective is working with the sub-regional initiatives like BIMSTEC, SASEC, and BBIN, and also some of the emerging multilateral platforms in South Asia, like the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CTRI. The other important opportunity we see from the rights-based perspective is more engagement on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, UNGPs, and the ongoing national action plans in most of the countries in South Asia. So I think I will stop here and look forward to your inputs and the dialogue on some of these issues. And thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Terrific. Thank you, Raj. Thanks for that great overview as well of inclusive dialogues on transboundary river governance in South Asia. So moving along to our next speaker, we have Mr. Muhammad Mamadur Rahman, who is the Director of the Indo-Bangladesh Joint River Commission, the Bangladesh representative in the Ministry of Water Resources in the Government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh. For his bio, Mr. Rahman holds a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering and joined the Bangladesh Water Development Board in January 1992 as an assistant engineer. He is formerly a member of the India-Bangladesh Joint Rivers Commission, and presently he is Director of the India-Bangladesh Joint Rivers Commission, Ministry of Water Resources, Government of Bangladesh, and the Superintending Engineer for the Bangladesh Water Development Board in Dhaka. The title of his presentation is Regional and Sub-Regional Cooperation for Integrated Water Resource Development and Management of the Ganges River Basin, Bangladesh Perspective. And with that, I invite Mr. Rahman to make his presentation. Welcome. Mr. Rahman, are you there? We can't hear you. You might be on mute. Hello, Mr. Rahman. We can see your presentation, but we cannot hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Great.
Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, sir. Okay. I am going to my presentation. My presentation title is Regional and Sub-Regional Cooperation for Integrated Water Resources Development and Management of the Ganges River Basin. This is Bangladesh perspective. I would just like to thank the first speaker, Ms. Mia Sipo. She is the Bangladesh UN resident coordinator in Bangladesh. So she has shortened my presentation because she briefly described about the water scenario of Bangladesh. What are the challenges? What are the what could we do for this in line with SDG 6.5? So now my work has been limited to a very short time. I think I'll be able to complete it before the scheduled time. Just I am going to the this is the world map and where the position of Bangladesh is there. And second, this is the transboundary rivers of Bangladesh, where all around the Bangladesh there is a India and Myanmar at the bottom and Bay of Bengal. So,
Mr. Rahman, sorry, could I interrupt just briefly? Sorry, could you push in the right corner of your screen for the full screen to show? So if you go,
yes.
Sorry, just on the PowerPoint, if you go down to the scale, just down the bottom here.
Okay.
Yes, that's it. Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the basin map, and so I am just highlighting some of the introductory. Earlier, it is Shibbir Shai. Earlier, it has been mentioned that Bangladesh is the lowermost riparian country of the three Himalayan rivers, Ganges, Brahmaputra, and the Meghna. And this is a very large catchment areas of the three basins, 1.7 million square kilometer. About only 7% lies in Bangladesh. And the 80% of the total flow occurs during monsoon for a period of the 5 months. That means June to October, and the 80% of the total flow that passes through a channel through the Bangladesh, and I think it has a great adverse impact on Bangladesh. It washes away all the river banks, installations, all the important places, and so on, many things. This is the scenario of the monsoon, but the scenario during the dry season is just rivers. Only about 7% of the total annual flow passes through the Bangladesh, and which is very scarce, and this has very much negative impacts on Bangladesh socio-economic condition. So in a catchword, I can say overabundance during monsoon and scarcity during dry season is a stark reality in the water sector of Bangladesh. And this is the basin map of four riparian countries: China, India, Nepal, Bhutan, and then at the downstream it is Bangladesh. And this is, I am particularly interested about the Ganges Basin, because Ganges Basin we have some success story, because we have a agreement between India and Bangladesh for 30 years. This historic treaty has opened a great arena for the two countries to help together in water sectors. So this basin has a vast catchment area, and only about 40% of the catchment area lies within Bangladesh. And on the other hand, Nepal is the co-riparian country. So this co-riparian country contributes about 71% of the dry season flow and 41% of the total annual flow of the Ganges. So it has a great contribution by the Nepal for the surface water flow of the Ganges River. So these Ganges water in Bangladesh, this Ganges dependent area in Bangladesh, it is 1/3 of the countries, and about 55 million people depends on these river waters. Very briefly, we can say that it has the irrigable area is around 1 lakh hectares, and we can only irrigate during dry season about 25,000 hectares. So it is just 1/4 of the irrigable area, because this irrigation or irrigable area depends upon the Ganges water. So during dry season, we share the Ganges water from January to May as per the schedule of the treaty. It is given. So according to the schedule of the treaty, we are sharing this water, but this water is very much negligible to fulfill the demands of the entire Ganges dependent areas in Bangladesh. And this is one of the consequence of Bangladesh. So we have a number of challenges in our Bangladesh in water sectors, particularly in Ganges Basin. First of all, it needs augmentation of the dry season flow at Farakka, because we are sharing the Ganges water as per treaty at the point called Farakka. So to augment the dry season flow, we need to cooperate with our riparian countries like India and with Nepal also. So we are trying to build up a common institution so that we can have our access to say what we are going to do. So we have some other agreements with India, Bangladesh, that is Framework Agreement on Cooperation for Development, where there is a way how to build reputation with the neighboring countries. By this time, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, India, all the 4 countries have formulated their own working group to work together with to find out the possibilities of augmentation of the dry season flows or other projects like hydropower projects by which we can the lower definitely can be benefited. So under this umbrella on Framework Agreement on Cooperation for Development, the Eastern Himalayan region vast opportunity for optimal water resources development and management through collaborative efforts. And earlier I mentioned that in Nepal there are so many opportunities for flow augmentation, generation of hydropower, and majority of the dry season flows is contributed at Farakka by Nepal, and which is about 41% of the annual flow. So in this case, regional cooperation as well as sub-regional cooperation is very much important to address the crucial challenges of the Ganges River Basin in a holistic approach, as well as jointly harnessing the resources. For this region, Bangladesh have proposed for formulation of a joint body like Ganges Basin Commission or Ganges Basin Organization, comprising in the co-recipients countries, which the co-recipients country will have a common platform to share all the data and information that is very much essential to share with the co-recipients countries for its future planning of in irrigation, in other water uses sectors. So now it is a great task for the co-recipients countries in the Ganges Basin to form a joint bodies. That is the very much important. And with this, I would just have to mention here that the first speaker mentioned about the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100, where we have had our 100 years plan, how we would proceed to manage the water resources or would use the efficient use of waters in our country. We have had our own plan of action, and we are advancing with these guidelines. But till now, we need transboundary water cooperations with the recipients countries. It needs political commitment and also stakeholders participation is also necessary. And that I earlier mentioned that transboundary water institution is also very much essential, and the framework, some legislative institutions such as water conventions, like water convention. These are the main actors that could be helpful for Bangladesh to work together with the co-recipients countries to use the vast water resources in this region in equitable and reasonable manner. And that is the final task from my side. And thank you all for patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman, and thank you. It's great to hear also from a joint body in the region working on transboundary water cooperation, and also from the perspective of a country within that joint body. So we really thank you for your insights in that regard. Now with that, I would like to move to our Next speaker, John Daw. So Dr. John Daw is Lead Water Specialist for Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, stationed at the Australian Embassy in Bangkok, working across Asia. He's involved in many of Australia's bilateral and regional engagements in water-related government-to-government partnerships and alliances with industry and civil society. The title of his presentation is Core Elements of Australia's Transboundary Water Reforms. And with that, it's my pleasure to ask John for his intervention. John, over to you.
Thank you, Remy, and good afternoon, colleagues. Thanks to the organisers and thanks to the previous speakers. Could I just ask the OXFAM organiser to put the slide up? I'm not seeing anything there, Remy, and I'm presuming that you can hear me.
One moment, yes, so we'll get Nee to put up your slides.
Okay, just open it up and I've got 5 minutes and that's all I need. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you know where I'm from. I'm going to just ask OXFAM to sort of open up the presentation instead of showing it that way.
Sorry, probably just taking a little bit of time to load here, John. Nee, can we confirm that we can put that in full screen mode, please? There we go. Over to you, John.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just keep saying next, Nee, away you go. So very quickly, ladies and gentlemen, you know where I'm from. Australia, a country of only 25 million people. Next slide, please, Nee. Okay, I mean, just keep moving, please. Highly variable climate and hydrology. And I just want to make a couple of points this afternoon to contribute to the South Asia discussion. Keep moving, Nee. Okay, not sure what's happening there, Remy. Just ask Nee to move through until the single slide with a yellow background. Okay, as you can see there, friends, our country is characterized by a very variable climate and hydrology. And I'm going to just give a few minutes about the Murray-Darling Basin. Please keep moving, Nee. And there's some images there that will just sort of quickly show. Many of the experiences in Australia have been shaped by a very severe drought from 97 to 2009. And then we've had yet another vicious drought through 2019. Nee, I'd like you to keep moving, please. Just keep scrolling through till we get to a slide of declining flows. Okay, so there's some images just being shown there as we move to the key slide that I want to discuss. But I suppose the sad experience is that we are now in a situation where we are having very much declining flows in our Murray-Darling Basin system. Please keep moving, Nee. Just keep moving through to a yellow slide. Yeah. Okay. Essentially, Nee's moving through to a particular slide, and this is the only one I really want to focus on. So it's core elements of Australia's intra-country transboundary water reforms. So for consideration by South Asia friends, our context is, I mean, I know we're told in presentations like this, don't have more than 3 or 4 points per slide, but in transboundary water governance, I don't think it's that simple. And so we've boiled it down as much as we can, but we just mentioned to you that from our perspective, having a national water initiative was a very significant step, getting the different governments, albeit governments of the same, within the same federation, to sort of agree on a purpose. We then had, in recent times, a huge effort to sort of get legislation which sort of impacts across boundaries. Remy, can you please get the slide through to the 11 core elements? The third sort of point that we're trying to work on, I suppose, which many of you know, is the entitlements and allocations system that we have, which makes our particular country unique. I mean, all countries are unique, but this is our sort of context. A fourth is that we've put a lot of time and trouble into creating a transboundary river basin organization, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. The fifth point is we're really working on sustainable diversion limits, including environmental flows, which has involved the state buying back water from an over-allocated system. Transboundary River Basin Plan, which is embodied in legislation, pricing, water trading, National Water Information System, a National Hydrological Modelling Platform, and compliance. And all of these things are part of our system. And for all of you who are very experienced, you would realize that you can't just focus on one piece of the puzzle. Transboundary water reforms are multifaceted. This is sort of a synthesis of the efforts we've been really concentrating on in the last 20 or 30 years. But of course, it's a much longer history before that. So these are the elements that I just offer the group for their consideration. We'll now move to the last slide. We're done. This is really the essence of the Murray-Darling Basin transboundary water reforms. It's very much a work in progress. There's still a lot of political pressure. There's still a lot of ecological pressure, social and environmental. So, it's a challenge, but we've got a large community sort of working on this, and this is the elements of our experience thus far. So that's all for now. Remy, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks for that really insightful capture of the reforms going on in Australia, and also how they're potentially transferable to the South Asian context. I think we'll take those into consideration for the Q&A, and we should get some really good responses. So thank you. Now, our last panel speaker for this session is Kate Lazarus. Kate Lazarus is the International Finance Corporation's Senior Asia Lead for Environment, Social and Governance Advisory based in Myanmar. In 2018, Kate received the top 30 of IFC Individual Corporate Awards for staff whose exceptional contributions, collaborative behaviours and innovative thinking. She developed, manages and leads an advisory program on environmental and social standards in the hydropower sector in Laos, PDR, Myanmar, Nepal and Pakistan, along with a cross-sectoral client-facing E&S program. She coordinates the ESG Landscape project, which carries out upstream assessments to pave the way for private sector investment. She developed the groundbreaking industry-led Hydropower Developers Working Group in Laos, PDR, Myanmar and Pakistan, along with providing sector-level advice to governments and intermediaries. She also coordinates the Powered by Women initiative in Myanmar and Nepal to promote gender diversity in the renewable sector. Her expertise focuses on water governance, multi-stakeholder dialogues, renewables, CIAs, human rights, conflict, environmental flows, and benefit sharing. She has lived and worked in Asia for 20 years. She's the editor of the book, Water Rights and Social Justice in the Mekong, lead author of the chapter on negotiating flows in the Mekong, in the book, Politics and Development in a Transboundary Watershed, the Case of the Mekong River. The title of Kate's presentation today is Integrated Planning Through Landscape Level Approaches. And it's my pleasure now to welcome Kate to share her slides and to begin her presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I just tried to get my presentation going. Sorry. If you can start to see it. Is it in full screen yet?
It's not in full screen yet, but I think it's just transitioning.
Okay, now?
It's in slide mode where it's, so I think we just need to go to the, in the slideshow, and that's it. There we go.
Okay, all right. So thank you very much. Thanks, Remy, for the introduction and also for the invitation to join this session. I also only have a very few minutes to present, and wanted to share a little bit about our work on integrated planning through landscape level approaches. And I think, building on some of the points that Arun made, this is a bit of the kind of combination of river basin work and transboundary landscapes, although we're working in particular countries, but having transboundary implications. So what we've been focusing on within IFC and piloting in a number of countries is what we call landscape advisory. This is really around looking at environmental and social interventions that can address risks across a geographic landscape that have multiple implications for the private sector as well as the public sector. And it's also these kinds of interventions where they're beyond the responsibility of one company. And so when we do work in river basins or in landscapes, we're wanting to see how a collection of stakeholders can actually come together and work collaboratively. So this will ultimately create an enabling environment as well as create an opportunity to unlock and address complex environmental and social issues. So when we're talking about, watersheds and balancing this notion of development and conservation, we're talking about, issues that go beyond one company to solve alone. These are sector issues that depend on the presence of natural resources that are geographically concentrated. They may be around bringing together hydro, wind, and solar power. They're effectively affecting the same environmental and social receptors. So they may be collectively impacting on communities, on biodiversity, on human rights, water, and security in an integrated manner. And the standard approach, looking, project by project is also inherently limited because we only look at a project and how it can impact on the environment and people, and we're not looking, sort of upstream and downstream. We're also getting involved in a lot of development at too late of stages. This is really around the ESIA stage, and it's often too late for effective management and also when we're dealing with sensitive environments. And there's really no single entity that has the ability to leverage management, only has the technical know-how and an ability to convene stakeholders. So we need to look at how to bring everyone together to be able to effectively do this. And so what we call upstream is really where we're trying to get involved in development as early as possible to avoid these impacts, which were often high risk. They're also can be very costly, especially if there's joint mitigation options like offsets that need to be developed. And we have the potential when we're working upstream to reduce the chances of unexpected delays. So I just want to give a couple of examples. So one we're involved in is around the Trishuli River in Nepal, where we're looking at investment of hydropower there. But it's a very complicated environmental and social landscape. There's limited capacity, and this is an area with indigenous peoples. This would be a barrier, on the main stem of the Trishuli River. And we actually conducted a basin-wide cumulative impact assessment, really to help bring in more data and information and to look at, consistent survey methods. We do see across South Asia that there's, lack of consistency of these kinds of methods. And in particular in Nepal, where there's a regulation around providing local shares to communities and indigenous peoples, you know, there really wasn't much knowledge about what that means. Is it really a benefit sharing mechanism and how this could be addressed, as well as attention to gender. So in this particular, you know, case, we work to bring the developers all together into a forum, talking to each other, sharing of information, sharing of data, improving, you know, guidance around the EIA process, introducing basin-wide CIAs, you know, conducting a basin-wide environmental flow assessment, looking at, you know, river connectivity transects, trying to bring in new innovative approaches like environmental DNA to monitor aquatic species, conducting the first free prior informed consent process, and really integrated gender, particularly looking at implications for gender-based violence. So the end result is a more informed process, you know, that links project to sector to country and ultimately, you know, in a transboundary way, because we actually brought together colleagues from Pakistan who are working in similar kinds of Himalayan river systems and, you know, who are studying species like the golden mahasir and others that are present in these particular catchments. I do want to just touch on gender because it hasn't really been focused on so much, but we're really seeing that, you know, there's huge opportunity to address, you know, women in the power sector more broadly. And that we did a recent study in Nepal that found that, you know, you can see from the bottom chart, there's really limited engagement of women as employees. So in the technical realm at the different stages of development of a power project, also women in executive roles, women at the board level, and more broadly. So, you know, check out this research where we're working now with 19 companies in Nepal to really help them to bring more gender related diversity and equality within their companies themselves. Now, you know, to ultimately take these kinds of landscape level approaches, thinking about it from river basin perspective and turn that or translate that into management actions, particularly from an ecosystems perspective. I mean, we do broader than ecosystem, but for the purposes of this discussion, I wanted to just focus on the importance of really incorporating environmental and social issues into government policies at the early stages of development planning, really looking at you know, management from a watershed management perspective and all of those different receptors I mentioned, looking at environmental flows as part of the EIA process. So not, you know, it can be standalone, but not necessarily later, but that is really integrated, or when conducting higher level strategic or cumulative assessments that these are incorporating environmental flows, and that there's a role to play. As mentioned earlier about mining, and I'd be really interested to further that discussion where we see, especially in Pakistan, significant sediment mining and really impacting on the aquatic fish species and other organisms, which would be something that needs to be more sustainably managed. Now,
Kate, sorry, we're beyond time. Could we please wrap up quickly so we can get to the Q&A? Thank you.
Yep. So just to mention, we draw a lot of our experience from other places, like in Myanmar, where we've done a countrywide assessment, but more relevant also is what's been done in the Jalan Punch in Pakistan to look at sort of aquatic and you know, sensitive river systems. I think it's important not to forget about other infrastructure, such as in the top right, the transmission grids in Myanmar, also looking in Nepal about how these, you know, cross boundary and have also a number of environmental impacts. So the importance in conclusion is really to build that solid methodology for assessment, bringing this in at different stages of development, replicating and exchanging knowledge upstream and downstream. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks for those great insights, and particularly also highlighting the gender aspect in your work. I think that's really good for everybody to see. So with that, we're running a bit over time, but I'm happy to say that we're also now in an ample question and answer time. So I would ask you now to take into consideration the panel's presentations, and I want to thank all of the panel for their presentations. Now with the Q&A session, we welcome comments and questions. We see that people have been writing some questions in in the chat box, which is great, and we'll continue to monitor them. And please note that we have some guiding questions in the agenda, which we circulated, which we hope can help people to center and focus their questions. So those guiding questions were, are there any other additional initiatives, approaches necessary to consider relevant for South Asia after what has been mentioned already by the presenters? How can we improve coordination and enhance with these initiatives using existing or new platforms? And the third one was, what frameworks and networks can improve transboundary governance and implementation long-term, especially at the country level? So with that, I'm going to open the conversation to participants, and we have a submission that's been submitted to us by Shilpa Gopal, and I'd like to invite her to make the first intervention if she can. Shilpa, I would like, in private message. Shilpa, please, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hello, everybody. So what I just want to ask is, and also an observation to start with, is with regard to transboundary frameworks which are there. So coming from a legal standpoint, because that's the kind of work we do, what I feel is that the national frameworks which are there in the transboundary arena, they're not really aligned to the challenges and the concerns which are arising in transboundary cooperation. And I think there is first a need to understand them, the national frameworks, and then to align whatever is coming out of these transboundary challenges into the national frameworks. Because other than that, there is no space to address those issues. I'll just give an example of what I'm just trying to say. And I think that's been highlighted in the OXFAM presentation also, which is talking about bottom-up processes and approaches. And we have seen in our work itself that the bottom-up processes which are there actually do not address the community voices. And I think what is really required is the community voices to be integrated in any kind of cooperation agreement, especially with regard to smaller rivers between India and Nepal, which is there. Because what we have seen is essentially that there are disputes, there are conflicts on water sharing. And especially this is important in the context of the SDG 6, where we are talking about providing water for drinking purposes, for sanitation purposes. So sharing of water in the border areas is an area which needs to be addressed, which needs to be studied, and also evolve that what are the legal measures that can be evolved between the two countries. Because between India and Nepal, we have just, the bigger treaties, the Kosi, the Gandak, but we do not have any of those processes. So I think UN as a body which is looking at transboundary should look at how to incorporate these kind of voices which are there, an institutional framework that can be developed, because right now there is none. If there is a conflict between the communities on the border, there is no framework to address it. So that is something that could be looked at, really speaking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shilpa. Thank you for that great first intervention into the session, and coming from the legal perspective. I think you raised some important issues. I was just wondering whether any of the panelists would like to speak. Maybe Mr. Rahman would like to speak from the perspective of the Joint Rivers Commission being a joint body that's working within the context of a legal framework over a shared river. Mr. Rahman, do you have any inputs on that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for giving me some opportunities to add something to the Shilpa Chauhan. Yes, there is a problem of sharing of waters at the border areas. It is really very problems. There should be a mechanism. There should be a mechanism to measure the waters at border areas, sharing between the countries. Either it may be structural measures or it may be non-structural measures. Say, for example, Bangladesh and India have signed the Ganges Water Sharing Treaty, which is measured at Farakka. It is a measuring point. We are measuring this quantity of volume of water, and then the waters are shared between the two countries. So first of all, we need to have we need to fix some points where it should be shared, when it should be shared, and how it could be shared. So these three questions should be solved firstly. Then we could go for formulation of the sharing mechanism. So I think we have so many framework agreements we have had in our hand, through which we can share our common water resources of a common international course. So with that spirit, we have in Bangladesh have a framework agreement on cooperation for development. We are working with the 4 co-referent countries, China, Nepal, India, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. So we are trying to find out some joint projects with which we can work together, and we can share our benefits among the countries, and we can share our information, knowledge, how we could use the vast water resources of this region through collaborative approaches. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman, for that comprehensive response as well to Shilpa's question and comment. I will now like to call upon, we have an intervention specifically focused on the Nexus and tools and approaches from Anuka Lipponen. And Anuka, I would like to give you the floor, and you can make your intervention. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Thanks for organizing the talk. So in the Water Convention Secretariat, I'm mainly dealing with insectoral issues and also monitoring and assessment issues. And it was really great to learn about all these tools and approaches for sectors that are.
Sorry, Anuka, could you speak closer to the microphone? It's a bit muffled.
Okay. Is it more clear now? So it was very good to learn about the work in the region. Something that may be of interest for assessments, integrated assessments in this region also, is the experience from the framework of the Water Convention, from development of a participatory assessment methodology for the Water Food-Energy-Ecosystems Nexus trade-offs synergies. This has already been applied in 6 river basins and one aquifer. These are well documented and available if you are interested. And it's a framework kind of methodology that we are very interested in analytical tools and participatory tools that you have in South Asia that could also be promoted with this methodology. This active engagement of governments and basin organizations in this Nexus work has been very important from the start. We worked on this since 2013, and a global platform is provided in the form of the task force on the Water Food-Energy-Ecosystems Nexus with focus on transboundary level. This just met a couple of weeks ago, and now one main task that is underway, and with very much welcome experience from South Asia, is a synthesis that we are doing with IUCN on Nexus solutions and investments. The survey is open, and I will share a link in the chat, and we very much welcome responses by the end of the week. Thanks for your attention.
Great, thanks, Anuka, and thanks for highlighting those possible connections between the tools under the convention and also what's happening in South Asia and what's been presented today. Does anybody have any remarks to that? Maybe Arun, if you have any response to that, or any intervention? Otherwise, we can move on to another question.
No, I will just say that, I'm aware of it. Thanks for highlighting, and I will look into it. But the thing is, in the context of Hindu-Kush Himalaya region, how can we, kind of adapt that? So that's what we would like to do next. And again, these are very helpful. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Arun. We've had a number of comments and interventions from in the chat box from Vishwa Sinha from IUCN. So I would just invite Vishwa to take the floor and just to provide his intervention and any question that he has for the panel. So thank you, Vishwa.
Thank you, Remy. You can hear me? Yeah, so very quickly, one question that I have is that many times as a practitioner, I think whether Nexus is a new thing or it's a new name for the integrated river basin management or water resource management. So it's a thinking framework. But the problem is that how to achieve a Nexus solution, how to identify a Nexus solution, because the understanding of interlinkages at the basin level between different sectors is very poor, because there is not enough data sharing. And in this kind of a scenario, I think benefit sharing as a dialogue process provides a tool to achieve Nexus solution, because it starts with the identification of the stakeholders, what kind of ecosystem benefits are kind of provided by the basin, and kind of negotiating how you enhance those benefits. So this process is important because it also creates understanding among the stakeholders that why trade-off? Because agreeing, I mean, when you're talking about trade-off, one is kind of gaining, one is losing. So both the parties have to agree to that. And that's where benefit sharing is an incremental process. We are working with the UNECE in applying benefit sharing in Transboundary River Basin in Africa and CO Malabar Malakisi River Basin, where the work is mostly about prioritizing that what kind of investments are good for the basin. Whereas in the Meghna River Basin, we are working with the OXFAM program to just kind of, understand that what are the benefits and who are the stakeholders. We are at a very kind of an initial stage, but we have already looked at how ecosystem approach could be integrated in the benefit sharing. One of the things which is emerging from dialogue process is that most of the forest or the watershed is in India. So Bangladesh, if works alone, cannot achieve any Nexus solution. It's important that the managed forests are managed well in the Indian side. So this is one point as benefit sharing in achieving Nexus solution. One more point, and then I can finish. When you start a benefit sharing dialogue, one of the biggest challenges that we face is the data or the evidence to facilitate those dialogue. How can you make the people agree? And it's very difficult sometimes to get the data from the government sources. And this is where I think the CSO academic collaboration can really do wonders for the region, because CSOs and academics both can interact in informal ways at the transboundary level. At the one hand, CSOs have low capacity.
Vishwa, I just wanted to intervene with time, so if you could please.
Yeah, very quickly. Yeah. So CSOs have a low capacity on data and research. Academicians have credibility on that. So if these two collaborate together, we can have data which is available in open source and could help facilitate those dialogues. Thank you. That's it.
Right. Thank you, Vishwa. Thanks for your intervention. Does anybody on the panel wish to respond to Vishwa's intervention? Open the floor. Maybe Raj, do you have a particular comment in regards to that?
Thanks, Remy, and thanks, Vishwa, for that very insightful thought. And I think your point on CSO's academia partnership is definitely something that can better inform the dialogue processes, not only in terms of generating data, but also looking for common methodologies around benefit sharing and also building trust, at least among the research community. And that could definitely also help in engaging with the policy process, because most of the academic institutes in the countries, they work very closely with policy-making institutions. So that could be definitely an alternative and something that we could definitely look forward to work more on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Raj. Thanks for responding to Vishwa in kind.
Can I just
Yes,
few
Mr. Rahman.
seconds? Yes,
Go for it.
this the information that was raised by Mr. Bishu, it is very important. Yes, it is required for CSOs and academicians involvement, and also here it is very much important for the association of the political politicians. So politicians have the great role in convincing in the mechanism of the core African countries to do or to go for some solutions. So the politicians must be involved in the policy making. So these things would be very easy to solve between the two countries. Without politicians, we cannot do it. This is so far. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman, and thank you also for highlighting the fact that these initiatives and approaches don't operate in a vacuum. There must be political will, and thank you for highlighting that from the perspective of the Joint Commission that you're a part of. Now, with that, I would like to call upon another intervener, and I do note that there's been some great discussion in the chat box. Some links there to resources, and also some comments in regards to the first comment by Shilpa on frameworks. So thank you everybody for adding to that conversation in the chat box, and I encourage people to continue to do so. We have a verbal intervention requested by Deepak Gyawali from Nepal, and I would ask him to make his brief intervention now. So Deepak, if you're available, the floor is yours.
Very quickly, my internet is pretty unstable, so I put my questions in the chat.
Deepak, can you please turn up your volume if that's possible? Just the volume on your headset. It's quite low.
Can you hear me now?
It's very low. If you can turn up the volume, that would assist.
Try without the.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Sometimes these, because my internet is pretty unstable, I put my two questions on the chat box. Basically, that pertain to the Nexus approach as applied to transboundary issues. I've also given two links where these ideas are discussed in greater detail, which is for light homework afterwards, I guess. But essentially, it comes around the issue of transdisciplinary problem feeding. And my question to the panelists was, do you know any agency, any university, any think tank that's actually doing this problem feeding? Example, a civil engineering outfit like irrigation department, is it getting much problem feeding, a Nexus approach problem feeding from, say, social anthropology, from religious studies on the nature of the sacred rivers, etc., etc. The second one is silos have been notorious for cost externalization. And Nexus approach is different from IWRM and others in that it hopes to expose the cost externalization by silos, open them up for dialogue and thus trade-off. Now, the example I have is, well, my colleague from Bangladesh did talk about flow augmentation by building dams in the Himalaya. Well, people live there. They've got their farms there. They have to be dislocated. They're deprived of their, farms and homes and forest and everything else. Now, what is the new ideas, creative ideas regarding the sharing of these social and environmental costs? Because the benefits will be shared by downstream. And this applies, for example, to the Indus. Now, the more we look at the Indus Treaty, which is claimed to be this great success story, it ignores the needs of the upper riparian Kashmiris, and it completely ignores the needs of the delta fisher folks of the Sindh. It's heavily concentrated on the irrigation area of the two Punjabs in India and Pakistan, ignoring upstream and downstream both. So these are my two questions.
Thank you very much, Deepak, for your intervention. Do any of the panel members have a particular note to answer either of those questions? Arun, Raj, Mr. Raman, John Doerr, do you want to add from the experience of Australia in tackling all of these complex issues? Kate, the floor is open to any of our panelists.
Remy, I'll have a quick try if I may, but I won't go to Australia. I'll take the group to the Mekong for a minute. And I just want to refer to the earlier comment that CSOs and the academic community are important. Indeed, they are. I think that in the Mekong, the transboundary sort of academic cooperation and CSO cooperation has I think pulled track one along behind it. That's point one. And then just responding to Deepak, I think that who's been a great contributor to the Mekong processes, I should say, but I think that just the whole idea of creating a forum which doesn't overprivilege water and doesn't just revolve around IWRM or IRBM is important in and of itself. And so again, I think Mekong has been quite good at endeavoring to have a regular sort of platforms at different levels, which have specifically sort of been framed as water, food, energy, environmental sort of gatherings. And in that way, it doesn't overprivilege one or other sector, but endeavors to sort of bring them together to for a little bit of robust deliberation. I'll leave it there.
Terrific, thanks, John, and thanks for bringing in the perspective of another transboundary basin and the experiences there. Does anybody have another response to Deepak's interventions from any of the other panelists?
Remy, if I can go next quickly. Thank you, Deepak-ji, for your interventions. Trying to sort of reflect on the first one on problem feeding from other disciplines. And I think this is a very critical point that you have raised in terms of bridging the boundaries across disciplines and supporting more transdisciplinary kind of research and approach. And I don't have many examples from the Ganges Basin, but what I see from the policy context, particularly in India, and also I think in Nepal and Bangladesh and other countries, these policies outside the water realm. For example, in India, now India is working on its science, technology, and innovation policy, the new education policy, where they are focusing a lot on this kind of interdisciplinary kind of curriculum and things like that. And same is also maybe, I think things are being taken up in other countries as well. So I don't have any specific sort of example on this, but I think the policies outside the water sector, and I think that is a great opportunity for some learning and inspiration from other policy initiatives, which are not so much on the water sector, but particularly related to training, capacity building, and ways science is done and used in policy making. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Thanks for your response as well to that. So we're running short of time. So I just wanted to say, I see a response from Anuka has raised her hand. Anuka, if you just wanted to quickly respond to the point, and then we might have another intervener.
Sorry, I was unable to lower it. Technical issue. I've already intervened. So that's fine.
Okay.
Remy, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself. We have an intervention here from Sheikh Rakon, who sent a message. So Sheikh, if you would like to make your intervention, please, the floor is yours, and please be brief. Sheikh, can you hear us?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, River and Greetings to everybody from Dhaka. I'm Sheikh Rakon from River and People, a National Civil Society organization based in Dhaka, Bangladesh. My intervention is that the Bangladesh Transboundary River situation in Bangladesh is vice versa, because Bangladesh is key to the transboundary basins, the major transboundary basins in South Asia. You see, except the Indus Basin, 3 of the 4 major basins meet the ocean through Bangladesh. So Bangladesh is important in the discussion or dialogue in the transboundary issues in South Asia. And transboundary rivers are also key to Bangladesh because all the hundreds of rivers of Bangladesh are directly dependent on the transboundary flow. But there is a vicious circle around the transboundary river escape. Unstable flow, unstable flow encourages the encroachment or grabbing, then pollution that cause the erosion and finally loss of life and livelihoods. If we see it water, energy, ecology, food lenses, water is erratic and excessive flow in the flood season, but huge scarcity in the lean season, mainly due to the barrage diversion in the upper riparian region. And in energy, dams are in the upper riparian region, but adverse impact are impact into the lower riparian region in Bangladesh. But Bangladesh neither get benefit or nor burden sharing. In fact, we don't have any benefit or burden sharing mechanism still, though we have a couple of treaties. And in ecological perspective, we have no international, multilateral or bilateral framework for the transboundary ecology of river, for the safeguard of the transboundary river of the ecology of the rivers. And in case of food, there is a paradox, irrigation and ecology. You see, we have in Bangladesh at least 11 big irrigation projects. 8 of them are commissioned on the transboundary rivers. And we have more than 50 rubber dams. Dozens of them are commissioned on the transboundary rivers. And that rubber dams or irrigation projects are damaging fish habitat, migration, and production. They are definitely playing role to food production, the rice and other crops, but they are damaging the fish production, which is very one of the major food production in Bangladesh. And we have shallow and deep tubes. It's literally thousands, and they are destabilizing the groundwater level. So from riverine people, we are advocating for 4R approach for benefit sharing. One is right of rivers, the e-flow, biodiversity, that's at the rights of river we have to ensure. And second R is riparian recognition.
Sheikh, can I ask you please to finish up your comments so that we can some intervention. Thank you.
The riparian recognition should be a common treaty on the common rivers and recounting the roles, not only water, sedimentation, waterway culture, and the river and community engagement. That's our 4R approach for benefit sharing. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Sheikh. Thank you for your comment. As a final, at the final comment, we have Jacqueline Jacob has submitted a private question in the chat. So Jacqueline, I would like to call upon you if you'd like to make a very, very brief intervention because we're running very much over time. We need to take a pause and then we need to come back for the next session. Jacqueline, can you hear me? Are you able to make your intervention? With that, we can't hear you, Jacqueline. And we're also running very, very short of time at the moment. So if we can't hear from you, what we'll have to do is we'll have to wrap up this session. So with that, I would like to say a very big, big thank you to all of our panel speakers for joining us for their really, really insightful interventions, which really set the scene quite well from various perspectives as well, and bringing a rich experience both from in the region and also cooperating partners and states who are working in the region in partnership with South Asian states and agencies. And also a very big thank you to our participants for their questions, both in the chat box and also their verbal interventions. I think this has been quite a rich discussion. We've had to cut it a little bit short because the presentations went over time. But I think so far what we've seen is that there's a willingness there to talk about these issues. and to enhance the dialogue at different scales, which is a great thing to see. And I think the conversation is definitely going to continue, and particularly on this topic of the Nexus and the Nexus approach and possible opportunities within South Asia. So with that, I would like to say thank you to our keynote speakers and to our panel speakers for joining us. We'll take a very short break. We'll take an abridged break of 12 minutes. So we'll come back in 12 minutes time for the next session. And the next session will be moderated by my counterpart, Arun. And the next session will be talking about is the one regarding topic 2, which is enhancing disaster preparedness along South Asia's transboundary rivers, floods and droughts. So we thank all of you for sticking with us on this elongated version of a webinar. We did it so that we could really have some rich discussion and some rich input. So we thank you for hanging in there. But we think this is a very important discussion to have. So please take a break now, and we'll see you back here in now 11 minutes. So please take a break and see you soon. And please stay logged in. There's no need to log out. Just mute your microphone and turn off your camera, and we'll see you back here shortly. So thank you all.